Hello there, thrill seekers. I got a question on the internet from a friend of mine, and it says this. Sorry if this is basically a rehash of questions you have gotten before, but I've forgotten what you've said. And you and my teacher sometimes seem to imply that the answer to this question is yes, and that doesn't sit right with me. So, is it un-Buddhist to try to change society for the better? So the question is it un-Buddhist to try to change society for the better? Okay, so here's what I think. No, it is not un-Buddhist to try to change society for the better. A lot of people seem to think I say that, but I'm not saying that. I think that if your inclination is to try to change society for the better, then by all means go out and try to change society for the better. However, I think it's good to realize that the results of your attempts to change society for the better are not in your control. If it is the will of God for society to change for the better, then society will change for the better, and if it's not, then it won't. And if you don't like the phrase the will of God, then you can say the will of the universe or the will of the source or whatever. Or if you really want to get totally secular with it, if it is the will of society as a collective whole to change itself for the better, then it will change for the better. You can't force that change to happen. And furthermore, if it's your inclination to try to change society for the better, that's what you're going to do. So if that's truly what you are sort of motivated to do, that's what you're going to do, and I might as well not comment on it because there's nothing I can do to stop it if it were my inclination to stop it, which it's not. For my own part, I don't try very hard to change society for the better. Or maybe I do. So let me try to parse that out. I feel like there are big problems with the world, big problems that get a lot of news and a lot of reports and a lot of internet chatter and a lot of YouTube videos, and there's all sorts of things going on. And my ability to affect those big issues isn't much. So I try to affect the things that I can affect. And one of the things I do is I really believe in Zazen, in the practice of Zazen, in the philosophy that surrounds Buddhism, and I do my best, and I do make a lot of efforts to try to promote that. So, in a sense, I'm trying to change society for the better, but I'm trying to do it in a subtle way. One of the things I learned from Nishijima Roshi that I've talked about on this video channel a few times is it came up when I was having a lot of trouble at the company I was working for. And this is not trying to change society for the better exactly, but it's analogous, so hear me out. It was a big company with a lot of stuff going on and a lot of people and a lot of things going on, and it was a very old company, and most of the people there were Japanese. So my ability as me, Brad Warner, who did not have a very large position in the company to change the course of where the company was going was not very great. And I had this discussion with Nishijima Roshi about all my problems and stuff about that, and he said, you can make things a little better. And just the way he said it and the context in which it was said meant a lot to me, because I started to see that maybe I didn't have the ability to affect the whole thing and to change the course of the company, but I could work in my little area and make things a little better. So that's what I do to try to change society for the better. I try to work in this small area that I believe will eventually become extremely important and may be the driving force for a true major change in society, but it's a change that will not happen in my lifetime. So I'm working on something that I will never see the results of, and that's kind of hard. I think one of the problems that happens with a lot of people who have it in their minds to change society for the better is that they get very frustrated because they have an idealized notion of what they want things to be. And when they don't see that happening, they feel like they've failed, and sometimes that causes a lot of frustration and a lot of impetus to put even more energy into it and, really beat things up and you get very angry and upset. The other thing is about changing ourselves for the better. I think that's very important. And the other day I posted, I didn't make this meme up, but somebody put it up and I reposted it. I guess that's what you kids say these days. And it was from Kodo Sawaki, and the quote said, "Even in the case of putting down a teacup, it makes a big difference. If you simply let it fall, or if you lower it carefully with your hand." And this is kind of the Zen Buddhist approach to things. If you ever do a retreat at a Zen temple, you will find that there is a tremendous amount of attention paid to little tiny details, like how you sit, how you sit on the cushion in the exact way that you rotate. Everybody has to rotate to the right, and the way you place your hands, and certain little other niceties that you do, like when you pass the Buddha statue in the middle of the hondo, I think it's called, the main hall where they usually have it. You're supposed to stop and bow. Things like that. The way you eat is very set, and there's a very specific way to do it, and there's a lot of attention depending on the Zen temple you go to. Sometimes the attention they pay to this stuff is almost crazy. How much really they attend to it. If you go to one of my retreats, I'm a little bit more relaxed, but I do pay a lot of attention to that stuff, and I do expect others to work hard on getting that stuff right, because that stuff has an impact. All of these little things you do have a much wider impact. It's like the butterfly effect. I've talked about this before. The butterfly effect, the sort of caricature version, is a butterfly flapping its wings in South America causes a hurricane in North Carolina or something like that, when actually probably that doesn't happen. But we do know from chaos, I think it's called chaos theory, you scientists can correct me if I'm wrong, that little changes can make a huge impact in a bigger system. So I tend to try to work on those small things instead of trying to affect large scale, huge societal change. Another aspect of changing society for the better is a lot of it tends to be extremely ego-driven, like trying to see yourself as a good person because of the things that you were doing, these specific things that you were doing. But if you actually stop and examine yourself as a person, you're pushing an attitude on people, and that attitude is something that we tend to claim for ourselves. But if we actually look at whatever attitudes we have, whether it's a left-wing attitude or a right-wing attitude or this attitude or that attitude about whatever, we don't have a whole lot of control over that. We didn't have a control over who our parents were, or where and when we were born, or what societal influences came to shape us, or what thoughts even popped into your head, my head. If you actually sit and watch thoughts popping into your head, you will find very quickly, I think, most of us discover to our surprise and often shock and consternation, and sometimes it's really troubling, that you don't have any control at all over what thought pops into your head next. So this kind of conglomeration of thoughts and opinions that you're trying to push on people, it doesn't even really belong to you at all. So removing ego from the trip is, I think, really a good thing. This attitude, I think, might cause a little bit of consternation for contemporary American Buddhists who tend to be all about changing society for the better. And if you'll allow me a little bit of a rant here, I'm never that impressed when I see some of the things that contemporary American Buddhists are doing to change society for the better, because they always seem to be working on these very sexy, very trendy, very popular topics. Whatever the big protest is this week, that's the one they're going to join, or that's the one they'll get their picture taken or put on social media that they're, we look how involved we are in this big, thing. And I know from the way it works when you're running an organization, like a little Buddhist organization, that it's good publicity for the organization to be seen at the popular protest, or to be just seen with the right hashtag or something like that. And I would be a lot more impressed at some of these American Buddhists who are trying to change society for the better if they would get into some subject, some place that needs our attention that just isn't getting a lot of attention, and talk about that instead of joining the most popular protests. Talk about I don't know, the opiate crisis in the Midwest. Nobody's talking about that, and it's a huge thing that claims a lot of lives. A friend of mine's son died opium overdose when he was like 18 or 19 back in Ohio. The WHO, they stump for the Teenage Cancer Trust. Who thinks about teenagers with cancer? But that's a big thing if you're a teenager with cancer, and I'm glad to see somebody's working on that. And I'm just unimpressed by these Buddhist organizations who get into only the most trendy topics, only the biggest protests, and I think, oh, yeah, you want to be seen there, don't you? Good for you. But there you go. I think it is fine to try to change society for the better, and I consider a lot of what I do, including what I'm doing right now here on this YouTube channel, as my effort to change society for the better. But don't expect much. And I think it is a good thing to try to work on making things a little better in the areas where you can make things a little better. And it's less important to be seen as part of large social movements that are very active right now and very that seem very important because the news media is choosing to focus on them at the moment. And I don't know how much more those movements need. I would be more interested in working on the smaller movements that aren't getting as much attention or as much help. That would be, if I was going to give somebody advice on how to change the world. And then just the things you do in your own life. I mentioned this in my book Hardcore Zen, that I was very impressed with the punk rock scene when I first got into it, because they were very into these big movements that were big at the time, like the nuclear freeze movement was one of them, and toxic waste, which is a big thing that was happening in the Midwest where I was at the time. They were big into these kind of things. But I'd go over to the house, where they all lived, and it was kind of trashed, and people weren't taking care of themselves, and they weren't taking care of their own hygiene and the spaces that they lived. And that had an effect on their ability to actually make any change that they wanted to make. And they didn't see how this small stuff that we do in this very little tiny area actually has a great effect. So that's what I think about changing society for the better. Maybe everybody will hate me because I said that, but that's my opinion, and there you go. Anyway, if you want to help change my society of me for the better, you can send a donation to the URL you're seeing on the screen right now. That is my only way of making a living, and even when I'm out touring and stuff, it is still my #1 source of income. So I really, really appreciate those of you who keep donating, and that's how I keep going. So thank you very much for that. But this content is offered for free, so don't worry about donating if you don't want to, or if you can't. That's no big deal. Thanks a lot just for watching. We will see you again. Have a good time all the time. Laters. Bye. Ziggy changes society for the better by being the cutest dog in the world.